Did I tell you last time what Yahweh was? Yahweh or Yahweh or whatever, YHWH, is a third person Hebrew verb, fourth form causative, meaning HWH in Hebrew is always the root of to be. He who causes to be, i.e. the Creator. And when Moses meets him, if you know your Bible in Exodus, and he's at the burning bush, who should I say sent me? He said, okay, you're weak, I'll tell you. Tell them, I am who am, have sent you. I am who am who have caused myself to be. I am, self-creating principle. I am who am, have sent you. Ahweh. Why Ahweh? Because Ahweh is first person. Ah in Hebrew is I. Yah in Hebrew is he. Tell them Ahweh has sent you. And then he said, all right, I'm going to tell them Yahweh has sent you. Sent me. So when Moses repeats it, he changes it back to third person. Tell them he knows it's a verb taken as a noun. And we don't have it in English, a causative verb. We have, in Hebrew and Arabic, there are causatives. We call them fourth form verbs. How did the people who translated the Bible in the 1600s, this is what I mean, getting everyone on the same level here, come up with the word Jehovah? We all know that's wrong, that's why they're saying Yahweh. But why is it wrong? Do you know why it's wrong? I mean, it's an innocent mistake. It's not their fault. When the Protestants wanted to get a Bible, they didn't want to go to the Catholic Bible, so they said, look, let's not go to the Catholic Bible. That's how we got the Apocryphal books. I told you that last time. Let's go to the Jewish Bible. And so the Jewish Bible had YHWH, but they didn't realize Jews didn't pronounce that. You see, if you know Hebrew, you'll know that it's written like this. That's YHWH. It's written like that. That's written script, not the actual Babylonian character that you have. But they would put the vowels underneath like that in what we call diacritical points. Arabic does the same. It makes Hebrew so frighteningly difficult because most Hebrew texts are unpointed. If you go to Israel and read a newspaper, it doesn't have the diacritical points. It doesn't have the vowels. So you can't read the newspaper without knowing the language first. If I see a word like NWSPR, newspaper, but I didn't know the word was newspaper, I might pronounce it all kinds of ways. I don't know what I would do. The point is that if you don't know the vowels, and you don't know the vowels without knowing the language. Same with Arabic. American English shorthand was developed on Hebrew and Arabic, the prototypes. They didn't have vowels. When were the vowels put in Hebrew? Around the 10th century. So 20 centuries before that, Hebrew had no vowels. So someone in the 10th century thought he knew how these words were pronounced. I don't think he was always right. Okay, they did the best they could, but I'll take a given name here. What's the Hebrew name for King Solomon? Shlomo. What's the Hebrew name? Most of these kind of words I think are wrong. Well, what's the Hebrew name for Samuel? Shmuel. I don't think so. I don't think there was ever a king who would have called himself Shlomo, frankly. I really don't. That's just an imperfect vowel system that was put in there, you see. And you see, the Arabic knows the language before that. Samuel is Greek, Arabic, and English. That's where we get those words. And Sulaiman, Solomon, that comes down through the Greek Latin Vulgate and through the Arabic Sulaiman and stuff like that. So I think that probably was originally more accurate. Someone was not understanding the grammar when he did the diacritical points and putting diacritical points where he probably shouldn't put them. And those are two obvious examples. That's not all, the Hebrew Bible's not wrong about everything. But I think a few things it may be wrong about. And you have to do a comparative study of words before you finally decide how that word was pronounced 10 centuries before you existed. You can't go on oral tradition always, because oral tradition is very imperfect. That isn't the problem with this. They don't know how to pronounce this anyway, and they admit that. They don't know how to pronounce this. Because it was pronounced by the high priest when? Once a year, Yom Kippur, inner sanctum of the temple, and asked forgiveness for the people and pronounced the forbidden name of God. Otherwise, that was considered a blasphemous to pronounce the forbidden name of God. So when the Jews transmitted the material, wherever they saw YHWH or YHVH, whatever you want to call it, they put the vowels in for Lord, because they knew they were saying Lord, not YHWH. So just to remind them to say Lord, and the vowels for Lord were B and W, like in German, were Adonai. So they put in EOA here, or vowels similar to that, underneath in diacritic points. Y's are J's in English and European translation. So when the translators like Martin Luther, they said, oh, well, so this is just Jehovah, Jehovah. Oh, that's a nice sounding word, and so on. But it's wrong. Because those vowels are for this word. Or ed, if you like. Therefore, Adonai, the Lord. They're not for those consonants. But I think we can say we know how to do this. Take prophets like Jeremiah. You know what that is in Hebrew? Yirmiyahu. Isaiah, Ishiyahu. They added the name of God at the end of their name, Yahweh. Just like the place was called Yahud. Judea was called Yahud. It was something like Yahweh, but I don't know precisely how they pronounced it. I'm sure it wasn't Yahweh or Yahweh, But you say, well, how do we know? How did the high priest know? Oh, they knew how to pronounce it back then. Someone had to tell the high priest how to pronounce it. It just didn't come down as a divine inspiration. So I'm sure they whispered it to each other. And that was forgotten. And I don't think the Jews know anymore how to pronounce it. And I don't think the scholars know, and I don't think the Christians know. Partly they've separated them out by if they use Elohim or Yahweh for the name of God. And it turns out, if you want to read a book called Who Wrote the Bible by a guy named Friedman from the UC San Diego, it's a pretty good book. It goes through all this. That the ones that use El are the northern kingdoms, which also use the word Israel. So they build El into the name of the people. And if I haven't told you this, you know how Jacob got the name Israel in the Bible? He wrestled with an angel, one story in Genesis, right? I don't believe that story. How do you dare stand up to it? Because I think the guy who wrote it was another poet playing games. He was entertaining people. I don't think Jacob got the name Israel because he wrestled with an angel. And the angel was called El, God, or he wrestled with God, rather. Jacob wrestled with God. No, because that's a misunderstanding of the word Israel, just like we have other misunderstandings. Yisrael. You can take this in one sense, but you can also take it in another sense. Sarah can mean, I don't have the exact thing, I'm a little confused on the roots here because Semitic languages are built on 3-letter roots. But in one way, you understand is he. But Sarah in Hebrew is to rule. And I think just like there's another the Muslims like very much, Yishmael. Yishma, God hears. They put the noun after the verb in Hebrew. God will hear. Yishma'el, he hears. Yisrael, in a parallel, is God rules. And I do think that, in fact, the name Israel means the country in which God rules. Now, I don't have any biblical text to support that. I just have my brain. But anyway, I think that the northern kingdom, you see, has the name of God in the actual name. And you say, well, what's the southern kingdom? We'll get into this. Well, look at the name Yehuda. Well, if you just took this D out of here, you basically have Yahweh again. And it turns out that the Yahweh stories are all southern Judean stories. And I don't think it's by accident that the name of God is somehow related to the name of the tribe of Judah. Because the stories about Judah in the Bible aren't that great. I mean, what does Judah do in the book of Genesis? He has supposedly a daughter-in-law who kills all the men that she sleeps with because they obviously can't take the sexual activity that is generated. And so 2 of Judah's sons are killed or in that way. And then Judah says, I'm not giving you any more of my sons. What's her name? I think it's Tamar's article. Anyway, so then this is a nasty story about Judah. This is not a nice story. So someone is telling this story doesn't like Judah. So then Judah's being unjust to this woman supposedly. And then so she goes and poses as a prostitute. And she's sitting by the wayside when he comes by on one of his trips somewhere, and she entices him and he turns aside unto her, as they say, and lo and behold, he has a child by her, according to this story. So this is a nasty. In the Old Testament in Genesis, they love telling nasty stories about people they don't like. For instance, the neighboring peoples, the Moabites and the Ammonites. You know the story about their origins. I think it is, as I recall, Lot was sitting in a cave, and after Sodom and Gomorrah were burned up, and his wife was turned into a pillar of salt when she looked back. Tour guide stories. I've been down there. There's the pillars of salt. You know what that is? That's Lot's wife. You know, she was turned into a pillar of salt. What story is that like in Greek mythology? Orpheus and Eurydice. Orpheus goes into the underworld to find Eurydice, trying to take her out. She looks back. So which is first? The Lot and the pillar of salt, or the Orpheus and Eurydice story? They're obviously interconnected. So I mean, I don't want to pass judgment. So anyway, this story has Lot being in the cave because his wife is turned into a pillar of salt, so he didn't have any women. And so his daughters don't have any men. So they go in and I don't know how they get in there, but whether he's drunk or whatever, or what it's happening. They get him drunk, yeah, so he's drunk. And they each go in separately, sleep with him, and out pops the Ammonites and the Moabites. Well, that's just saying to your neighboring people, you know what you are? You know, your origins in the Middle East, that's the biggest curse you can do. Your sister is up. When the Jews are in Egypt, the Egyptians call them Hebrews, but they among themselves are pictures calling themselves Israelites. Now, when we get into the division of North and South, the South will be Judah, and the North will be Israelites. That's around after David, who's, I'll pick this up next time. Just wait a minute before you run. I know you all want to run. 1000 BC is David, and the temple built, 1000 to 950 under Solomon and David. Solomon's son is not strong enough to hold the thing together, and splits north and south under a general of David in the north. The north gets to be called Israel. The south gets to be called Judah after David's tribe. But the north is destroyed in this Isaiah material that I just read when the Assyrians come in the 700s. And the south miraculously survives down to the 500s, 600s, 585, when the Babylonians, Nebuchadnezzar comes and carries them away and destroys the temple, etc., 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 etc. But you see, that's where we get the legend I'll cover next time of the 10 lost tribes of Israel, because they didn't come back. But the Judeans do come back. And then what do we get?
In modern language, Jews. So each narrows right down. Hebrews, Israelites, Judeans, Jews. That's how it works. Look here in chapter 7 in Daniel, 7:12. We get this again when we look at it. It's about the horns and the animal, the horns that are uprooted. And everyone thinks this is the Seleucid Empire. You don't even know what the Seleucid Empire is yet. I'm going to tell you that next time. Anyway, these are the kings in the Seleucid Empire down to the 11th horn, which the Jews celebrate in their Hanukkah festivities as Antiochus Epiphanes. The 11th horn. I gazed and I saw in the visions of the night, it's one of the most famous passages in the whole Bible, certainly for Christians. I saw coming on the clouds of heaven one like a son of man. He came to the one of great age, and he was led into his presence, and on him was confirmed sovereignty, glory, kingship, and men of all peoples, nations, and language became his servant. His sovereignty is an eternal sovereignty which will never pass away, nor will his empire ever be destroyed. That is the prophecy that almost all of Christianity has plugged into. And that's where they get the Son of Man. But you see, it isn't the Son of Man. So where in the New Testament we have the Son of Man there's a problem there, let's put it that way. There's no one called the Son of Man. Just someone overseas who didn't understand this material well thought there was. So did Jesus say the Son of Man came eating and drinking? No, I don't think so. He may have said something like that, but he didn't use those words. And that's the problem. No tape recorders of that. I also mentioned last time that I thought that without the Maccabean movement you wouldn't have Christianity, and I'll try to explain that as we go along. But what we have here in 2:24 to 8 is the beginning of what you have to call the Zealot movement. Now, this is not the official beginning as far as Josephus is concerned. He has numerous names for it, but the main name he calls it is the fourth philosophy. And that's in both the Antiquities and the Jewish War. He has it at the same place, 4 BC to 7 CE. What happens in 4 BC? Herod dies. That gives rise to a lot of chaos. People think, by calling Herod the Great, that he could be conceived of as a great king. He isn't great, he's a monster. It'd be better to call him Herod the Terrible, like Ivan the Terrible. And Josephus is not trying to present Herod in a terrible manner. He just can't avoid it, because with his death, you see, that can also help you with the Gospels, can it? If you take the Gospels in any way as historical. The episode of Herod trying to kill all of the Jewish children, trying to kill Jesus as one of the Jewish children who will, in a messianic manner, supplant him. What Gospel is that in? I think it's Matthew. So that, if you look at your dates, it's certainly not 0, by the way. The whole date chronology is off. So Jesus, if you take it as an historical person, but he would have to be born before 4 BC, according to Matthew. Herod is still alive in Matthew. But what's the contradiction of that? Luke. For Luke, when is Jesus born? In the time of the census of Cyrenius. And that also is in Josephus. Now Luke seems to be reading his Josephus more carefully than Matthew. And you say, what? These guys were reading Josephus? I'm afraid they were. And we can point to, I don't have time or the ability right off the top of my head to point to where these things come through. But it's pretty clear that Luke is dependent in some places on Josephus. You say, well, what you mean, Josephus was known in his own time? Yeah, he was known in his own time. Well, he tells you when he was born. He was born around the time that most people think Jesus died. So he's born in the mid-30s. And he disappears from the scene with the composition of the Antiquities, which seems to have appeared in 93. But I think the last time we can actually get a hold of him is around 96. Some people think he lived into the early hundreds, like 103, 104, but I think he was executed in 96 myself. Now you say, why? I think he ran out of protectors. And so I think he went down with them all. And he does admit in the Vita, it's in the collected works if you want, it's very short work. So he does admit in the Vita that he's having a lot of trouble with accusations against him. That people are accusing him of having participated in the war against Rome, of having done anti-Roman things and so on and so forth, and he has to get people to support him. Epaphroditus. Now this and he says in his introduction to the Antiquities, and in the Vita too, I can't give you the exact reference, you can find it, that he dedicates all his works to him. This person had lived a very adventurous life, had survived many reversals, and was a very important person. Now if you look in the Pauline Corpus, Philippians is considered an authentic work, and he refers to Epaphroditus twice as his fellow soldier, Paul's fellow soldier in Christ or something like that, and workman in Christ. And then he says he's going to send Epaphroditus to Rome, to the household of Caesar, because Epaphroditus obviously has some inroads in the household of Caesar. Now, no one ever picks up on this, ever. I think it's a little embarrassing, and they all try to make reasons why it isn't the same Epaphroditus. I'm sure it's the same Epaphroditus. That Paul's traveling colleague in Philippians, who he sends to the court of, at this time it's Nero Caesar. And later on, this Epaphroditus pops up as Nero Caesar's secretary for Greek letters. And when Nero is being run down by the people in the bodyguard that have been bribed to kill him, he's with Epaphroditus. And it's in the Roman historians. I can't give you all the references. You'll find it in a lot of references from my books if you look in my books. And Epaphroditus survives that and goes on to serve the Flavians. But later on, the last Flavian, Domitian, who's a real brute like Nero, a horrible person, he's the one for whom they had birthday games in Palestine as they made their way up the Mediterranean coast after the taking of Jerusalem. Titus had birthday games for his brother Domitian, where they, killed the Jewish captives and in the ring for entertainment, or fed them to the animals. So they just took the captives. I mean, I know that we're supposed to have Christian martyrs, but Christian martyrs haven't raised their heads yet in this period. And these are all the Jewish captives that are being treated in this way. I'm very worried that the idea of Christian martyr in the history as it's passed down is being confused with these people, and that it's not until the maybe 2nd century that you maybe start getting Christian martyrs. After this generation of blood sports in the Colosseum that they helped build with the money, as I told you, from the sacking of the temple. But in any case, Epaphroditus survives, and he becomes Domitian's secretary for Greek letters. But at some place in the 90s, that's where I think this is where you're getting Christian martyrs later on, under Domitian and thereafter. Somewhere in that period, he runs afoul of Domitian, and Domitian accuses him of having raised his hand against an emperor. It's in the Roman historians. What he means by, Nero asked apparently, this is the story, whether it's true or not, this Epaphroditus to hold the sword while he ran on him. You can't kill yourself with a sword very easily. Whether Nero wanted it or whether Epaphroditus was trying to kill Nero, I don't think he was. Used that he raised his hand against an emperor as excuse for executing him. And I think if Epaphroditus went, Josephus would have done it. Because I said he's the person that he dedicates on. So he's a very important sponsor. And I think in the Roman court, I can't go any deeper in that, there's a bunch of crypto-Christians that are functioning there. And in fact, we find out that the pseudo-Clementines, which are written in the name of, they're called pseudo because the church considers them pseudo. But, you know, they're no more pseudo than any other document in this period. Clementines, I mean, I could call pseudo-Matthew, pseudo-Mark, they're all pseudo. You know, to call them the pseudo-Clementines makes you think negatively of them. If you like it, you don't call it pseudo. If you don't like it, you call it pseudo. Epaphroditus, then, is a pretty important fellow. So this is in the Antiquities that we're talking about, and I said Luke is dependent to a certain extent on the Antiquities. I got into this by telling you that these documents were circulating. They were being encouraged. Epaphroditus wanted Josephus to write a history of the period. He wrote two. He wanted information. His group wanted information about Palestine in this period. They used Josephus as a source of this. And for a while, Epaphroditus, and I think this is the same person that was Paul's traveling companion. And that's not a provable point, but how many Epaphroditus are running around, you know, in this period? So you look in Philippians, and how many are being sent to Nero's court? You know, I mean, what, there were two Epaphroditus running around Nero's court? I kind of doubt. Two Epaphroditus interested in Middle Eastern Jewish things? I don't think so. So in the Gospel of Luke, the census of Cyrenius is the trigger for his birth narrative. So Jesus is born in 7 AD in the Gospel of Luke, 6 to 7 AD. And I've said in all my other classes I've ever taught that one cancels the other out. You can't reconcile the two accounts. But what people do is they conflate. And they make a single account in their mind. So Jesus is born in a manger, and there's a star over Bethlehem, and there's no room at the inn, and Herod wants to kill all of the Jewish children, and so on. They conflate the two accounts, but you can't. Because in the one account, Jesus is living in Bethlehem and leaves because of what? Herod wanted to kill all of the Jewish children. And where does he go? To Egypt. His father flees to Egypt. Later he moves to Galilee, according to Matthew. But in the other account, he's already living in Galilee. And because of the census of Cyrenius, his family has to go to Bethlehem to be counted, because they're Bethlehem. Why would they be interested in living in Bethlehem? Bethlehem is the seat of the Davidic family. David came from Bethlehem. So in the story about Jesus, Jesus has to come from Bethlehem. In one of the Gospels, I think it's either Mark or John, the crowd says to Jesus, "We thought the Messiah had to come from Bethlehem." Okay, so Luke goes to great pains to get Jesus to Bethlehem to be born. Well, look, come on. You mean to say the whole Roman world was running all over the place to go home because there was a census going on? I just can't imagine that the Romans were that inefficient. But Luke's, the way Luke presents it, Jesus is going to Bethlehem to get born, and therefore we get the manger thing. But a lot of the pagan deities were born in mangers too, so it's not clear if that was a characteristic of some of these man-god birth scenarios. I don't think you'd be born in a manger in Palestine in December, let me tell you. Up in the mountains, it'd be pretty bloody cold up there, and the lambs and things wouldn't be skipping and so on. But look, that's because all this is retrospectively presented, maybe centuries later in Constantine's time, when all these things were, fleshed out in their final form. I don't know when all these points of the construction of the presentation we have were put in their final form. But one thing is sure, Mark and John dispense with the infancy narratives. They knew them, but they probably felt they were unreliable. Where does Jesus first appear in Mark and John? Among the disciples of John the Baptist. That would seem to be a reasonable assumption, given that John the Baptist was a more well-known and important leader even in Josephus. And if John the Baptist is an Essene leader, which I think we'll probably come to the conclusion that he may have been, then that would make Jesus and others like him a member of this Essene movement that's responsible for the Dead Sea Scrolls. So in any case, that's exactly the time that Josephus portrays the Messianic movement or the Zealot movement beginning in Palestine. 7 AD, and he has two portraits of it. One in the Jewish War and one in the Antiquities, and those two portraits don't agree. Because in the one portrait, he says it was founded by someone called Judas the Galilean. And he doesn't call it the Zealot movement, he calls it the fourth philosophy. That's in JW. But in the Antiquities, he says it was founded by two people, Judas and somebody called Sadduq or Zadok. And that is really interesting. And Zadok, of course, is, we'll find out, is one of the most important names of the Dead Sea Scrolls community. The question is this the founding moment of the Zealot movement here with Mattathias saying, let everyone who has zeal for the law, line 27, and takes his stand on the covenant, come out and follow me. And he fled with his sons into the hills. Now how far in 2 Maccabees? Could you put your finger there? 2 Maccabees does not begin with Mattathias. 2 Maccabees begins with a letter to the Jews of Egypt. And I think I told you that I thought this was a pretty authentic sounding letter. Greetings to their brothers, the Jews of Egypt. From their brothers, the Jews in Jerusalem. May God prosper you, remembering his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, his faithful servants. May give you all a heart to worship him and do his will with a generous and a willing spirit. May open your hearts to the laws and the precepts. So, once again, the Mosaic law is not as Paul describes it in 2 Corinthians 2-3. We're going to deal with someone in the movement who denies the law in the midst of the whole congregation. And, you know, we have a character here who fits that description. And so I wouldn't say that this person in the scrolls is Paul. That's going to depend on the dating and whether we think the righteous teacher is a James-like character. But he certainly, it's a Paul-like character, someone in the movement who splits with the leadership of the movement on the issue of the law. Because even Acts 21:21, and the next day Paul went up with us to James, and this is a reliable section of Acts most people think is what we call the we document. He told them one by one what God had worked among the Gentiles by his ministry, and they glorified God, and they said to him, really they're complaining, and it's James speaking, but you see, brothers, how many myriads of Jews there are who have believed, and all are zealots for the law. So this is James speaking. And they hear that you're teaching the Jews among the Gentiles not to circumcise their children. We know you've brought money up because you've been fundraising overseas. And we want you to do this, shave their heads and yours, follow this Nazirite oath, as it's called, line 24, to show that you yourself also regularly walk keeping the law. It's James demanding that Paul regularly walk keeping the law, and this is in the Christian Bible book of Acts. Anyway, when he goes in the temple, 7 days go by, and some Jews from Asia, line 27, Asia is Asia Minor, where he is doing all of the preaching that is spoken about earlier in Acts, saw him, stirred up the people, laid hands on him, cried out, men, Israelites, help! This is the man who teaches all everywhere against the people, against the law, and against this place. And now he has brought non-Jews, Greeks, into the temple and defile the holy place. Because there are people who are in here who have not taken the law and so on and so on. There is a problem in the movement itself that we regularly don't hear about. So back to our letter, in Maccabees 2. When Demetrius was king in the year 169, we true Jews wrote you as follows. Well, I don't know when Demetrius was king, but 169 is the Seleucid year. And I think Demetrius is king somewhere after Antiochus Epiphanes dies in Maccabees 1. And so we wrote you this way. In the desperate affliction that has come upon us in these years since Jason and his associates betrayed the Holy Land and the kingdom, and now we recommend you to keep the Feast of Tabernacles in the month of Kislev in the year 188. There may be a footnote in your Bibles. I got 124 BC for that, I think. In any case, this is an actual letter they wrote to Egypt in 124 BC. Who would have kept this letter? The Egyptian Jews. It would have been in their records. So now already we see that 2 Maccabees is more detailed than 1 Maccabees and goes back earlier. That is, it goes into the infighting of what was going on before Mattathias supposedly led the uprising. So who's the priestly hero of 2 Maccabees if Mattathias is the priestly hero of 1 Maccabees? Onias. And he's from the previous high priest line, and he is at one point also called a zealot for the laws. The letter continues with a second letter, line 10. To Aristobulus, tutor to King Epitome, greetings and good health. Well, this is the second letter, this one written by Judas Maccabee himself. So it's after he wins that stage of the struggle and purifies the temple. This kind of, plugs into Daniel to some extent. Line 18. And we shall be celebrating the purification of the temple on the 25th of Kislev. We consider it proper to notify you so that you may celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles and of the fire that appeared when Nehemiah, the builder of the temple and the altar, offered sacrifice. When some years elapsed in God's time, Nehemiah, commissioned by the king of Persia, sent descendants and priests who had hidden the fire to recover it. This is, of course, what they believed. It's a mythological thing that had occurred back in Nehemiah's time. But notice here, I have grave doubts about Ezra. This book, for instance, is one of many books that does not either know of or mention an Ezra. But they're biblical books. They're the last books, the historical books of the Bible. What are they called? The book of Ezra, the book of Nehemiah. But they overlap a lot. And they are pictured as doing similar or the same things. But what's Nehemiah's position in the Persian court? God, you're jumping around. Yeah, because I want you to understand these things. Let me see. What's Nehemiah's position in the Persian court, according to the books that we haven't read? Cupbearer. He's in the actual inner household of the Persian king. To be in the inner household of the Persian king, you have to be a eunuch. Why did you have to be a eunuch? Because the Persian king had a lot of women in his harem. So Nehemiah would have had to have been a eunuch. Now, according to strict Jewish or Mosaic law, he would not be able to perform at the temple. Such kind of defects. So to my mind, an Ezra character was literally created as an overwrite to Nehemiah. I have all this in my Maccabees, Anarchites, Christians, and Qumran book, and I have all the footnotes related to it to show that the genealogy given Ezra is totally artificial. It's the same genealogy as the previous high priest had. But now look at line 13. In addition to the above, It has also been recorded both in the archives that we have and in the memoirs of Nehemiah. I never heard of that book. They have books we don't have. How he founded a library and made a collection of the books dealing with the kings and the prophets. Who collected the Bible in the manner that we have it? Nehemiah. The writings of David, what are they? The Psalms, maybe there were other writings too. And the letters of the kings on the subjects of orphanage. Another book that they know or mention that has not obviously survived. In the same way, Judas Maccabee made a complete collection of the books dispersed in the late war, and these we still have. This is the letter, don't forget, that I wrote an earlier letter. If you need any of them, send someone to fetch copies for you. Judas Maccabee collected the Bible finally in the way we know it, according to this thing. This is really interesting stuff. Hey, Judas is a big guy. He's more important than we think he is. Do I credit this? Well, further along, this book says it's based on an epitome of a book written by Jason of Cyrene, line 20. We shall attempt to condense into a single document. So this is just an epitome of a much bigger history book that has also since been lost. Now, mostly, 2 Maccabees is, people have a dim view of 2 Maccabees. They think it's an inferior book to 1 Maccabees. I'm not sure it's inferior. One of the reasons I think it's inferior is because it has a lot of miraculous events in it. Heavenly horsemen. In a moment we're going to get the first introduction of a heavenly horseman. Chapter 3. Before their eyes appeared a horse richly caparisoned and carrying a fearsome rider, who, rearing violently, it struck at Heliodorus with his forefeet. He comes accoutred in gold. 2 other young men in outstanding strength and radiant beauty, magnificently apparelled, appeared to him at the same time, and taking their stand on either side, flogged him unremittingly, and Heliodorus fell to the ground, enveloped in thick darkness, and he was just about to die, prostrate under the divine visitation. Okay, they vanished. So this is why this book doesn't have a great reputation, because of episodes like that. But if you get rid of the charged emotion and clearly literary parts of it and just stick to the historical data, I think some of it is more reliable than 1 Mac. Now let's look, for instance, where does 2 Mac end? So 2 Mac starts earlier, but also ends earlier. 2 Mac ends with the victory of Judas Maccabee over another messenger called Nicanor. The point is, Maccabees 2 ends there. Nothing about Judas's death. Nothing about Mattathias is not even mentioned. He's a non-person. Where does Maccabees 1 end? Well, Maccabees 1 goes through Judas's victories. I'll go back over this, but quickly, Judas is killed in chapter 9. 9:19, we have the funeral of Judas. Then Jonathan succeeds him, his brother. We have some material about Jonathan's relation with the Spartans in chapter 12 of Maccabees 2. And then at the end of chapter 12, Jonathan is killed, I think it's at a banquet or someplace. Anyway, by treachery. Maybe not at a banquet. Then Simon takes over, the 3rd brother. Actually, if you look at the original material from the genealogies that were, I think Simon is the oldest brother. In this one letter here, chapter 14, 29, there was frequent fighting in the country. Simon, son of Mattathias, a Scion of the line of Joiarib, again, that he is of the priestly course of Joiarib. He assumes the high priestly office, line 47 of chapter 14. He has 2 sons, I think, chapter 16, called Judas and John. And then finally, there's a great banquet, line 15, that's the banquet. Simon and his sons were drunk, and this other traitor rushed out and killed them. But one of the sons, John Hyrcanus he's called, escapes. And line 22, the end of the book. Overcome he was by the news, John arrested the men who had come to kill him and put them to death. The rest of John's acts, the battles he fought, the exploits he performed, the city walls he built, and all the other achievements are to be found recorded in the annals of his priesthood, from the day he succeeded his father as high priest. So who is this fellow with whom Maccabees 1 ends? It's around 134 BC or something like that. So, when was Maccabees 1 written? Clearly after that. And what is it written, what purpose is it written to serve? To legitimate the succession of John Hyrcanus. It doesn't bother telling about his activities. It says that's all written up in another thing. This book is to legitimate the succession of John Hyrcanus to the high priesthood. Who is John Hyrcanus? Is he Judas Maccabee's son? No, he's Simon, another of the brother's sons. So really, you have to go back to Mattathias to legitimate the whole family. So the reason the book goes back and applies the zealot, high priestly legitimatization to Mattathias is to bring in the whole family under its, so that all of the brothers can be considered, legitimate heirs to the covenant of Phineas. So there's a political and historical purpose to this book that is missing from 2 Maccabees. Let me just look, did we do this Ecclesiasticus stuff? All right. It says this is written about 132 BC. Somewhat like the time of the other books. I'm sure 1 Maccabees is about then. I'm sure 2 Maccabees is about then too. A lot of literary activity here in Egypt at this time. This is written in Egypt, obviously. I think 2 Mac was written in Egypt too. When I arrived in Egypt, I had already spent some time there. I found this work, and so on and so forth. So he says that he translated it or did something with it. So that gives you a date for this. When a man comes to die, 10, 11, his inheritance will be the creeping worms. It doesn't yet have a doctrine of resurrection of the dead in this book. What other book, for instance, doesn't have a doctrine of resurrection of the dead yet? Job. And because if Job did have a doctrine of resurrection of the dead, it wouldn't be a problem. Because the question Job poses is, why do the good or the innocent suffer? Well, they're going to enjoy the afterlife. But if there's no afterlife, what's the answer to the question? Job doesn't give one. He didn't have one. Okay, so this is 40, 50 chapters of this kind of thing. Like chapter 19, 20. Wisdom consists entirely in fearing the Lord. Moving along here to the important stuff here, which really comes in chapter 44. Now let us praise famous men. But in the Hebrew, we found a Hebrew version of this book. It was found in the Cairo Geniza, the same place that the Damascus document was found. So the Hebrew is Anshe Hesed. Men of piety, not famous men, not illustrious men, as it comes into the Greek, but we should remember Hesed is the root of Hasidim, which we're going to meet momentarily in Maccabees 1 and 2, The warriors of Judas Maccabee are called Hasidim, the pious ones. So look who they are. Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Aaron, line 45:7. Everlasting covenant was made with him and gave him the priesthood of the people. This is a priestly book, we think, because it emphasizes the priesthood. And here we have our old friend Phineas again. Phineas, son of Eleazar, is third in glory. Eleazar is second, Phineas is third, because of his zeal. There was one covenant made with David of the tribe of Judah for royal succession, and the implication here is one covenant made with Phineas for priestly succession. That's why the Maccabees raised the covenant of Phineas. This is the mindset of this period. Joshua, Caleb, Solomon, Elijah, 48. He decimated God's enemies with his zeal, 48:3. So Elijah is another zealot. So if John is a reborn Elijah, according to the New Testament, what's John? Another zealot. Do I think John is a zealot? Yes, I do. And I don't accept the Christian presentation of him at all. Not the way it is parlayed into a presentation of the coming of the Prince of Peace or something. I don't think John sounds very peaceful in the New Testament, and I don't think he was very peaceful. And I don't think he was killed because he was looking forward to a peaceful time. And Josephus makes it quite clear that the presentation of the death, as I think I already told you in the New Testament of John the Baptist, is inaccurate. We can either choose the New Testament, the head on the table and the dance of the sexy woman, and the king who didn't want to kill him but had his head turned by women who made him crazy. But Josephus says Herod executed John because he was afraid, since he was so popular among the people, that they would do anything that he put it in their head to do, and therefore he executed him because he was afraid that he would suggest to them to revolt, and he didn't want to regret afterwards, so he would have thought it was better to do a preventive execution. Now, which sounds more believable? A king or a governor doing a preventive execution because he was afraid of the influence this person had over the people, or a woman doing a sexy dance? That absolves the king and makes him not guilty. And this is my problem with all those kinds of stories. All of them whitewash Herodian officials and Roman governors. Well, anyway, if Elijah is a zealot, which was the point of all this, so is John. And Elijah, as we'll see in Maccabee books, has a burning zeal for the Lord. And as Elijah is praised in the book of James. As Martin Luther said, the letter of James shouldn't be in the New Testament. And he's right. It's a Qumran, more in the Qumran spirit than in the general New Testament spirit. But if you're looking for Palestinian history, is what we're talking about. It hasn't anything to do with Palestinian history. Ezekiel saw the vision of glory, the chariots of fire, and so on. Zerubbabel we didn't mention. Zerubbabel was the king that returned after Cyrus declared the return from the Babylonian captivity in the 540s. He returned with Jesus ben Yehosadek, line 12. And that's when they started building the temple. And great too is Nehemiah. No Ezra. The second or third book that doesn't mention Ezra. And finally, the whole point of this book. But it was the high priest, Simon, son of Onias, who repaired, chapter 50, the temple during his lifetime, who laid the foundations to the double height and buttressed the temple precinct. So this person is praising Onias' ancestor, father actually. Cairo, Masada, and Qumran all have Hebrew versions of Ecclesiasticus. So I do believe that the Masada people were refugees from Qumran. In the one that was found in Cairo and in Masada, it also includes the Zealot covenant for Simon. He was a zealot for the laws, and it also speaks that he was a true son of Zadok, a righteous one. Later on in Christian literature, what is Jesus' brother James going to be called? James the Just, James the Tzaddik. And in some form of righteousness, Zadokite covenant is operating on behalf of James for the high priesthood. I want to get back to where I was. 2 Maccabees. Chapter 4 here. Jason was Onias' brother, usurped the high priesthood. A lot of trouble here. The end of chapter 4, 30 to 38, the murder of Onias in Antioch. So Menelaus and Jason vie with each other for the high priesthood. And it's at that point in chapter 5:11 that Antiochus Epiphanes finally is introduced. And he plunders the temple. And these Menelaus, and he's called a traitor to the law, 916, to some extent is involved in bringing him in to inspect the treasury. And of course he made off in line 21 with 1,800 talents of gold. Mount Gerizim is the, line 23, is the Samaritan sanctuary. And he's rifling that too. Line 27. Picks up Maccabees 1. So they lived like wild animals, like John did, in the hills with his companions. They are before John, to avoid contracting impurity, pollution, defilement. Because the whole thing has been taken over by this pagan sort of situation. A statue of the Olympian Zeus has been constructed in the temple precincts. The temple sacrifice has been ended. Even in the Noah story, there are 2 lines of the text line that are conflated together. If you do an Old Testament course, you'd see it with me. The alwist line and the outwist line. And if you can actually unconflate them. And the thing is that the second line realized that you couldn't go 2 by 2 into the ark. One line has you go 2 by 2 in the ark, but it probably didn't have the sacrifice at the end of the ark. So the problem is the line that has the sacrifice at the end of the line has to go of the clean animals, of the unclean animals 2 by 2, but of the clean animals 7 each. You've got to have enough animals there for Noah to sacrifice without ending the species. The temple sacrifice was not functioning in a proper manner any longer, and probably was not functioning at all. Therefore, in my view, the permission to eat meat and probably vegetables of a cultivated kind had been withdrawn. And only with the reestablishment of the temple sacrifice, which was the continuation of the Noah propitiation situation, were you once more permitted to eat meat. So the vegetarianism is not an ascetic vegetarianism here. It's a vegetarian contingent upon a polluted world. A world where the temple has been defiled. So he only eats wild plants because those are things growing of themselves. Now I think John the Baptist probably behaved exactly the same way. And I think the scroll people probably were very similar. And I think John is a representative person of the scrolls, but we'll get to that later. But the point is that John is pictured as eating only honey and locusts. Well, what happened when there were no honey around? And suppose the locusts weren't swarming. What did he eat? I don't think he sat boiling up locusts, frankly. I think that probably is a mistake in the tradition. More like Judas Maccabee, wild things growing of themselves. So the point is that they're eating things growing of themselves because those are not polluted. Now here are some really bad things going on here. The temple was filled with debauchery, prostitution, no Sabbath keeping. They ate the sacrificial entrails. A decree was issued, good picture of the times, in the neighboring cities, obliging them to share these meals, executing all who did not voluntarily conform to Greek customs. For example, 2 women were charged with having circumcised their children. They were paraded publicly around the town with their babies hung around their breasts and hurled over the city wall. Other people assembled in caves to keep the seventh day without attracting attention were denounced and all burned there together, since their consciences, Paul uses the word conscience as a euphemism for the law, would not allow them to defend themselves. So, they did not yet know that they could fight on the Sabbath. That shows how alien they were to being a military people at this time. Because I'm sure in David's time they fought on the Sabbath. If you didn't fight on the Sabbath, you're going to be attacked on the Sabbath all the time. Back to Maccabees 1. What's the first ruling Mattathias makes? That they can fight on the Sabbath in a defensive manner. Then they were joined by a community of Hasideans. Here's our first reference to Hasideans, line 42. Each a stout fighting man of Israel, a volunteer on the side of the law. They organized themselves in an armed force, striking down sinners in their anger, renegades in their fury. Mattathias went around overthrowing the altars, forcibly circumcising. They hunted down the backsliders. And then, of course, his days came to a close, line 49. And then Judas, chapter 3, takes over. But let's go back here. The end of chapter 6 and the beginning of chapter 7 are martyrdom tales about why you should make a good death eagerly and generously for the venerable and holy laws. And if you did this, then you would surely be resurrected. So, line 7, 9, the 7 brothers. As one of the brothers is taking his last breath, he says, "Inhuman fiend, you may discharge me from the present life, but the King of the world will raise us up, since it is for his laws that we die, to live again forever." All right, so what do we have here? And I'll pick up there next time. We have the resurrection of the dead as part of the Maccabean uprising. It's part also of the book of Daniel. That melds Daniel into the Maccabean uprising. The resurrection of the dead is to promote martyrdom. It's to encourage people to make a good death for the holy and venerable laws. One last point before you go, I want you to think about, look at chapter 7 of Maccabees 1. A new ruler, Demetrius, comes into power in the Seleucid Empire. The renegades and godless men in Israel, line 5, led by one Alchemus. It's with Alchemus that Maccabees 2 ends. Wanted to become the high priest. He was a wretch and a godless person, line 9. And he got the high priesthood from this foreign king, and he came with references from this king. The first among the Israelites to ask for peace terms were the Hasideans, line 13 and 14. So they, according to this, were prepared to abandon Judas for a priest appointed by foreign power, just because he seemed to have some legitimate priestly blood in his veins. But look at chapter 14 of Maccabees 2. A certain Alchemus, line 3, a former high priest who had willfully incurred defilement at the time of the insurrection, realized whichever way he turned there was no security for him. So he went to the king, line 6, and he told him, "Those Jews called Hasideans, who are led by Judas Maccabee, are warmongers, rebels who are preventing the kingdom from finding stability. That is why, after being deprived of my hereditary dignity, I mean the priesthood, I have come here now. And as long, finally, in line 10, as Judas remains alive, the state will not enjoy peace." So in Maccabees 2, the Hasideans are the followers of Judas Maccabee par excellence. In Maccabees 1, they are originally followers, but are backsliders. In Maccabees 2, they are the followers. What I'm going to say next time is that there are 2 groups of Hasideans. One compromising, one uncompromising, not backsliding. The second group are the Kiddushim, the holy ones of Daniel, the Maccabean warriors par excellence. And I call these 2 groups Pharisee Hasideans, meaning splitter away Hasidans, and Zadokite Hasidans. In time, the word Hasidim fell away. And then we get the 1st century BC, Pharisees and Zadokites. Then the Zadokites will split into Herodian Sadducees and Qumran Zadokites. And once again, the righteous Zadokites will be the Qumran Zadokites. The compromising Zadokites will be the Herodian Sadducees of the New Testament. I'll try to do all that for you next time, but that's what I want you to look at in this book.